When learning muscles in the arms and in the legs, it's best to compartmentalize. A couple ways to compartmentalize an arm. First is you would divide the arm into the brachium, or upper arm, and then the forearm. Then you can look at the anterior compartment of the brachium versus the posterior compartment of the brachium, and then you can do the same with the forearm. You can look at the anterior compartment of the forearm and compare that to the posterior compartment of the forearm. We're going to do the same thing when we get to legs. We're going to first look at the thigh, which is the region above the knee, and divide it into compartments. Then we're going to look at the leg, which is below the knee, and divide it into compartments. Much more manageable that way. And quite often compartments contain muscles that do similar actions. For example, when we're looking at the anterior brachium, that's where we're going to find elbow flexors. In order to flex the elbow, it should make sense that you have to be anterior because muscles are going to pull, and if these muscles attached to forearm bones, whether it's the radius or the ulna, and pull, they're going to be able to flex. Whereas if you are going to extend the elbow, you must be posterior. So the elbow flexors are in the anterior brachium. Elbow extensors are in the posterior brachium. Then you can look at the specific muscles. The prime mover for elbow flexion is the biceps brachii muscle. And we mentioned previously why they called it bicep. It's because it has two origins. One of them is on the coracoid process. We call that the short head. Another one comes off just above the glenoid cavity, and that's called the long head. They go together to form the belly, so there's the belly of the biceps. And then they insert together at the radial tuberosity. So if you can imagine this muscle contracting and pulling on that radial tuberosity, the elbow will flex. So that's the prime mover. Well, there's also a synergist. There's a couple synergists, but the most important synergist is the brachialis. The brachialis is deep to the biceps, so if we were to remove this bicep, we would actually see more of the brachialis. The difference is where they insert. The brachialis inserts at the ulna on a structure called the ulnar tuberosity. Together, they provide very strong, powerful forearm flexion. The bicep being the prime mover, the brachialis being a synergist. If we were to look in the posterior compartment, we would find the elbow extensors, the prime mover being your triceps brachii. Tricep referring to the fact that there's three origins that form three compartments within the tricep. These compartments have specific names. This compartment here is known as the lateral head of the tricep. This one here, the smaller one, is the medial head of the tricep. This one here is known as the long head of the tricep. So you have lateral, long, and medial heads of the tricep. The tricep brachii is the prime mover for elbow extension. This little guy here is a synergist. That little muscle is known as the anconeus. Anconeus meaning elbow, but it provides synergistic elbow extension. So those are muscles of the brachium. Here's a transverse section through the brachium. It's another way we can, divide up this brachium and see the posterior compartment compared to the anterior compartment. If we were to cut transversely through the brachium, we would see the humerus centrally located. We'd see a number of nerves. These yellow guys are nerves. Number of blood vessels. This is known as the brachial artery, and these are some veins. Some adipose tissue. And then if we look at the compartments, this would be the anterior compartment. This would be the posterior compartment. This would be the lateral side. This is the inside or medial side. So if this is the anterior compartment, there would be the biceps. Notice it's divided into the two components. The brachialis, which you would be able to view if you looked laterally. And then in the back or posterior, the three compartments of the triceps brachii muscle. So tricep being the prime elbow extensor, biceps being the prime elbow flexor, brachialis being a synergist to the biceps. Now let's move down into the forearm. A lot of muscles in the forearm because we have precision with our hand movements. Whenever you have a lot of precise, fine movements, it requires a lot of muscles. There's a way to learn these muscles. One, know what you're looking at. We're looking at the anterior forearm. Most of the muscles in the anterior forearm are going to be flexors, but not of the elbow, more of the wrist and fingers. So you'll notice most of these muscles have tendons that cross into the wrist or even extend all the way into fingers. So what are they? We're going to move lateral to medial. This is the lateral, thumb side. This is the medial or pinky side. The largest forearm muscle is known as the brachioradialis because it actually is found in the distal part of the brachium as well as the forearm. But it's the most lateral muscle in the forearm, and it happens to be the largest. It does a number of actions. It flexes. It actually helps to flex the elbow, but it also helps to flex a little bit at the wrist. It supinates, which if you recall, supination is moving the palm anteriorly, but it can even pronate the forearm. So it provides a number of different actions. If we move across, we see what's called the pronator teres, which if you notice, it's running on an angle. It's not extending down into the wrist or into the fingers. It's actually crossing over and attaching to the radius, which is going to be found deep to the brachioradialis. And it moves that radius over. So when it does that, it pronates. So it turns the palms posterior. Pronator teres. Teres means cylindrical. Next one is called the flexor carpi radialis because it flexes the wrist and it's more radial, it's more thumb side. It also helps to abduct the hand and wrist. So abducting the hand is moving that hand away from the midline. So it'll flex and abduct the hand and wrist. There's one called the palmaris longus. It's also a flexor of the hand and wrist. It goes down and inserts right into the palm. So if you see a tendon that it inserts right into the palm of the hand, that's the palmaris longus. And then on the other side of the palmaris longus is the flexor carpi ulnaris, which also flexes the wrist, but it adducts the hand. That's a typo. It should be adduction of the hand. If your flexor carpi radialis abducts, then it should make sense that the flexor carpi ulnaris adducts, because it's pulling on that pinky side of the wrist, which would move the hand towards the midline. Best way to learn these 5 muscles would either be to work your way lateral to medial like I just did, have a couple other things in the back of your mind like who's the biggest, brachial radialis, which one goes right down to the center of the palm, and then you look on each side of the palmaris longus and you would find the 2 flexor carpi, the radialis on the thumb side, the ulnaris on the medial side. There's a lot of muscles that are deep underneath these more superficial muscles. Posterior forearm. These are going to be mostly extensors. Extensors of the wrist or extensors of the fingers. First one, extensor carpi ulnaris. Kind of added an arrow to show you that it's pulling that way. So that would extend the wrist or hand. There's extensor digitorum, which goes into fingers. So this muscle has many tendons that are going to be extending into your fingers, kind of straightens your fingers out, extends your digits. There's an extensor carpi radialis, extends the hand and wrist. But it's more on the thumb side, whereas the extensor carpi ulnaris is more on the ulnar or pinky side. So these are all extensors. They're in the back. They're in the posterior forearm. Next video, we're going to talk about the leg, starting with the thigh and then moving below the knee and looking at muscles of the leg.